Istanbul, I'm Michelle Kosinski. Also ahead, heavy fighting on the outskirts of Ukraine's capital now. Russian forces inch closer and intensify their attacks. Ukraine defiant as President Zelensky says Russia will only take Kiev if it razes the city to the ground. Russia continues its onslaught on the southeastern port of Mariupol, where hundreds of thousands of people are still trapped. Negotiators from Russia and Ukraine say there has been some progress diplomatically, and formal talks could happen soon. The Ukrainian negotiator says they hope for some results in a matter of days, potentially, and a Russian delegate was quoted as saying the sides could soon arrive at a joint position. But Ukrainian cities continue to be destroyed, and authorities say the most important task right now is to get aid into the besieged city of Mariupol. President Volodymyr Zelensky says around 1,300 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in these 18 days of fighting. He also says that Russia has suffered unprecedented losses with more than 12,000 troops killed, calling that the biggest blow to the Russian army in decades. The southern port city of Mariupol has faced possibly the heaviest bombardment yet. Ukraine accuses Moscow of again obstructing evacuations of civilians. Russian troops are also disrupting access to that city, making it impossible for food, water, and medical supplies to reach people. And the northwestern town of Irpin, near Kiev, has come under heavy Russian artillery fire once again, almost a week after it was first targeted. Despite the ongoing fighting, the evacuation of civilians there is underway. Donncha Backhoyne, a professor of politics at Dublin City University, joins us now from Dublin, Ireland. Donncha, thanks for joining us. So what do you think of now? I mean, day by day, we're seeing massive bombardment of these cities. We're seeing a lot of civilian deaths. And now, on the 18th day, both sides are talking about a possible breakthrough in diplomacy. What are you making of these statements?
I have to confess that I, like many others, I think including most people in Ukraine, are not optimistic about Russia's willingness to negotiate anything other than a complete surrender. You have to contextualize any talk of a diplomatic resolution with the reality of bombings throughout Ukraine. Kiev, of course, under murderous assault, Mariupol, Odessa now looking like a next target, Western Ukraine bombed today.
Right.
So this is very difficult to reconcile with any talks about a diplomatic breakthrough. Of course, we all hope for the best, but it's very difficult to reconcile with realities on the ground.
Exactly, because every time there has been a talk, even high-level talks between the foreign ministers, while the attacks were going on, they were held here in Turkey. I mean, there was some hope put on that the fact that the Russians were willing to show up could lead to something, that maybe this would be a chance for Vladimir Putin to say, okay, this is an exit ramp for me to stop sustaining all of these casualties on the Russian side as well. However, every one of those attempts was doused. But now to hear the Ukrainian negotiators saying, before, Russia was not hearing that, we're not going to budge on some of these issues. Now they seem to be listening. Now this seems to be more promising. Hearing that coming from the Ukrainians seems to be at least a little more than we've heard over these past more than 2 weeks.
Well, that's true. But at the same time, Vladimir Zelensky has said that he's willing to give peace a chance. And if there's even a scintilla of a possibility of a breakthrough, he's willing to send his people there. So there have been talks in Belarus, there have been talks, as you say, in Turkey. But you remember what Sergei Lavrov said in Turkey. He said that we're not planning to attack any other countries. We haven't attacked Ukraine. So, if Russia still doesn't acknowledge that it has attacked Ukraine, it's difficult to know what exactly they're negotiating.
Yeah, I hear you. And so over the past 24 hours, 48 hours, we've seen an increasing level of destruction in some of these cities, especially around the port. And it's been sort of this slow motion waiting to see what happens with Kiev. What are your thoughts as we watch Russian troops close in?
I think we're entering a critical stage, and I think that's what President Zelensky said as well, because the citizens of Kiev have been now well armed by their mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. 25,000 automatic weapons, 10 million rounds of ammunition have been distributed to the ordinary citizens. These are not the soldiers. And therefore, we're going to see, I think, a lot of irregular warfare if the Russians try to occupy Kiev. Kiev is a huge city. I mean, even to encircle Kiev, you're talking about tens and tens of kilometers. So the Russian military will be already overstretched. So this is if they're going to try and take Kiev, I think we're looking at a prolonged war, and a prolonged war will further drain the Russian resources. The Russians are already losing troops on a scale not witnessed in any conflict they've engaged in. So I think that's why the worry is that Vladimir Putin will descend into ever greater depths of brutality to get the military victory that he desperately needs, and on which his regime depends, because he's wagered everything on a victory in Ukraine. If he loses then the war, then Vladimir Putin, I think his regime is in jeopardy.
Okay, Danico Backcoin, great to talk to you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
An entire city in eastern Ukraine no longer exists, in the words of its governor. Volnovakha in the Donbas region has seen some of the heaviest fighting so far between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed fighters from the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic. The battle has laid waste to the city. Claire Harriott reports.
A bird's-eye view of a post-apocalyptic landscape. This is what's left of Volnovakha. No wonder the governor says it's been wiped off the map.
The Volnovakha district had more than 100,000 people. Of course, most of them have already been evacuated. That's why I'm talking about this. Volnovakha, with its infrastructure as a city, no longer exists.
It's a subterranean existence for the few people who are left in the city, including children far younger than the conflict in this area. In 2014, Russian-backed separatists formed what they called the People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. They've been using violence to break away from Ukraine. Volnovakha is located nearly halfway between the rebel capital city of Donetsk and the port city of Mariupol on the Sea of Azov. It's therefore a strategic prize in the Russian military advance. It helps provide President Vladimir Putin's forces with an inland gateway to the coast.
What is his victory eventually? That he claims some kind of land bridge to the Crimea? That he holds one city or three cities? Or, I don't think that he can hold them over time. And the Ukrainians will resist, whether it be from Western Ukraine or whether it be from Europe. And then Kiev itself just seems, insurmountable right now. They can shell it and they can try to destroy it. It will be a horrendous undertaking. But there is no victory, I think, for President Putin in Ukraine right now.
The subjugation of Volnovakha, a Russian-speaking city, may yet come to signify a quintessential Pyrrhic victory. It now stands as a ghost town, where nothing's sacred in the cruelty of conflict. Claire Harriott, TRT World.
Denise Bergtai now joins us live from Kiev. Denise, are you going to stay there through this? How are you? What is your plan?
Thank you very much. Now, for the moment, I'm very well. I'm fine. The situation in Kiev is normal compared with Kharkiv, for example, because there's no intense shelling here. Yes, we hear the sounds of artillery, but those are on the outskirts of the city. The Russian troops are about 26 kilometers on the west of Kiev and about 26 or 27 kilometers on the east of Kiev. However, they haven't managed to surround the city completely. So there are foods, all the necessary materials are available in the city for the moment.
And Denise, Russia's stated goal, part of it, is to take over Kiev and install its own puppet government there, one that is friendly to Moscow. What is the thought among analysts there as to why Russia hasn't just bombarded it by air? Why is it using its air force in other cities? Why not the capital now?
Well, there might be many reasons, but one of the reasons, in my opinion, is that Kiev is also considered as a holy city also by the Russians, because the Russian nationalists perceive Kiev, they claim that Kiev was the first capital of the Russians, because today's Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, they took their roots from the Kiev Rus Principality, which lasted from the 8th century until the 13th century. Maybe for this reason, they didn't launch an air bombardment in Kiev, I suppose.
All right, well, this is really good information. It's good to have you there, Denise. Stay safe, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
A Russian missile attack on a large Ukrainian military facility has killed 35 people and injured more than 100. The facility is near the border with NATO member Poland. The Ukrainian army held most of its drills with neighboring countries there before the Russian attack began. The regional government says Russian planes fired around 30 rockets at the Yavor International Center for Peacekeeping and Security. Dasha Chernysheva in Moscow says the Kremlin has continued to defend its attacks in Ukraine.
What we keep hearing from the Russian Defense Ministry is the same narrative as we have heard before. Russians are targeting only the military infrastructure of Ukraine. They are not targeting the civilian infrastructure as well as the civilian population. Now, very importantly, Russians keep also saying that the nationalists in Ukraine, they keep those civilians hostages. And of course, in the most recent briefing, the Defense Ministry has said that they have already hit 3,700, almost 3,700 of those ground objects of the military infrastructure, as well as they have also noted that nationalistic battalions are keeping people hostages, particularly at one of the monasteries. 300 people, including monks and civilians, have been held hostages and not allowed by the nationalists to leave, just simply being used as human shields. That's the narrative we get from the Defense Ministry here in Moscow.
Ukraine's fierce resistance to Russian forces has slowed Moscow's attacks, but Kiev says the West needs to do more. Laurie Timmers reports on its call for aid.
Ukrainians are resisting the Russian offensive, but the coming days might bring even greater hardship. President Volodymyr Zelensky is demanding more action from the West.
I believe the involvement of our Western partners, their leaders, is not sufficient.
The US and its allies have been united in supporting Ukraine's government in its fight against Russia. They sent arms and aid and imposed multiple rounds of sanctions, but they've refused to send soldiers or impose a no-fly zone. In its latest arms shipment, the US is sending $200 million of small arms, anti-aircraft, and anti-tank weapons. The US Secretary of State says the international community is united and determined to hold Russian President Vladimir Putin accountable. Yet, the help coming in doesn't seem to be enough. Ukrainian authorities have been asking for more Javelin anti-tank weapons and Stinger missiles to shoot down Russian aircraft. NATO has warned of a potential Russian attack on supply lines of allied nations supporting Ukraine. The move could cause the conflict to spill over Ukraine's borders.
The suffering we now see in Ukraine is horrific. It affects us all. And we have a responsibility to ensure the conflict does not escalate and spread beyond Ukraine. That would be even more dangerous, destructive, and even more deadly. The situation could spiral out of control.
As the West worries about a wider war, Russian forces are edging closer to Kiev, and Ukraine's cries for help are growing ever louder. Laurie Timmers, TRT World.
And Andy Rosen joins us live from Washington, D.C. right now. Andy, what is coming out of the U.S. government today?
Well, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, said, Michelle, in the last hour or so, that the U.S. is warning China not to backfill, so to speak, not to help out China recover its losses, either militarily or economically, in all of this. Also, they are warning the Chinese to stop spreading disinformation on their airwaves that parrot Moscow talking points in all of this. And in fact, the Russian Foreign Finance Minister said in the last couple hours or so that Russia is relying on China to help backfill its economic losses in all of this. So the U.S. is warning the Chinese not to do that. On a more positive note, Michelle, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, will be meeting with a top Chinese diplomat to talk about all this in Rome on Monday. That could be a very significant step. The first time that we're aware of that China has actually taken an active role now in at least talking about, diplomatically, looking at ways to deal with this conflict. In fact, the CIA director here in Washington told Congress a few days ago that the Chinese President Xi Jinping is very unsettled by what he's seen, unsettled by the economic and reputational damage that it could have on China in all of this, and that a lot of people are thinking that maybe Chinese President Xi Jinping could be a key player in ending this conflict.
Yeah, not surprising. I mean, China likes non-intervention whenever possible. However, China and Russia are big trading partners. Russia needs China a lot more than China needs it. But you can see naturally that trade was set to continue and grow. So when the U.S. warns China not to help Russia out on this, what happens now? I mean, what would the penalty be if their trade continues as normal?
Well, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, would not say, only that there would be severe consequences for anybody who takes this kind of action, maybe helping out Russia economically or militarily. But you know, China's growth economically has slowed to levels not seen in the last 30 years. They are feeling there. And Chinese President Xi Jinping is said to be unsettled as well by the course of how this conflict is playing out. And in fact, Jake Sullivan said that maybe the Chinese were lied to by the Russian president. He lied a lot to a lot of people prior to this conflict about what the Russians were going to do, and that maybe Xi Jinping feels lied to as well. Maybe that is right. Discussion with the Americans on Monday in Rome.
Very interesting. Okay, Andy, thanks for that. Russia's attacks on Ukraine have been taking a heavy toll on civilians. The Ukrainian president says 125,000 people have escaped from cities under siege so far. But the humanitarian corridors they're using are under threat as attacks continue today. Russia and Ukraine blame each other for the civilian casualties as Ukrainians are forced to scramble for food and safety. Sarah Balter has more.
A harrowing escape for thousands of Ukrainians displaced by fighting. Many are lucky to be alive as humanitarian corridors have proven less than safe.
Russian soldiers which killed people and they stayed us on the road. This road was mined. There are mines.
You see, when you pass the Russian block post, it's not clear what they have in mind. We have all seen so much horror.
Russian attacks have forced more than 2.5 million civilians to flee abroad, according to the UN. But hundreds of thousands remain trapped in besieged cities with dwindling supplies. The UN reports violence has broken out among people in the port city of Mariupol, fighting over food. Russian officials accuse Ukraine's military of stopping civilians from leaving.
Armed formations of nationalists mine residential areas, destroy bridges and roads, and destroy life support facilities.
But the governors of Kiev and Donetsk say Russian attacks continue during temporary ceasefires meant to evacuate people and deliver aid. Those who've managed to escape the attacks are hoping for a moment of peace.
We came to Kiev and we'll get used to the fact that it's quiet here, constantly quiet. Children are crying all the time. The situation with food was difficult. A lot of corpses of local people just lie on the streets.
But as Russian forces close in on Kiev, the silence isn't likely to last. Sarah Balter, TRT World.
During the closing speech at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu spoke about the reports of Turkish people stuck in the Mosque of Sultan Süleyman in Mariupol in Ukraine.
We
are in contact with our citizens in that mosque thanks to our connections in the field, since the phone lines have been cut off. Yesterday, there were reports that the mosque was bombed, but the imam of the mosque didn't confirm those reports. The bombs fell at a point that's not too far from the mosque, but not too close either. There is no damage to the mosque right now. The Russians asked us how many citizens we have in that mosque, and we gave this information to Russia. We strongly support Ukraine's territorial integrity, but we also believe we need to work with both sides for humanitarian purposes. I spoke with Lavrov and asked for assistance to evacuate our citizens from Mariupol.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard has released a statement taking responsibility for the missile attacks that hit Iraq's northern city of Erbil. American and Iraqi security forces say 12 ballistic missiles fired from Iran landed near the new U.S. consulate building there. Tehran says the attacks were aimed at Israeli strategic centers in northern Iraq. James Dorsey is a senior fellow at Singapore's Middle East Institute with more on Iran's allegations here.
We don't know of any. I mean, it's not improbable